Brigid. She's the primary example of an early pagan goddess surviving into the Christian era. The devotion to this goddess was so entrenched that the Christians, well, kind of convert her along with the people and call her Saint Brigid. Brigid was known by the Celtic Britons as Brigantia, in fact their ancestral goddess that was associated with the power of the rushing rivers and thrusting hills. She was also known as Bride in Scotland and Brigandou in France. Now Brigid's name derives from the Celtic root word brig, which means exalted. She was, in fact, the daughter of the Dagda, the Great Father, and an expert in poetry and arcane learning. She carries a cauldron of sacred knowledge. She has two sisters that are pretty much identical and are also called Brigid. They're associated with the arts of healing and craftsmanship. The three sacred sisters were often treated as a single goddess. The three Brigids are not separate, but aspects of one divinity. This is a feminine, pagan Holy Trinity. They look identical, as I mentioned, they look identical to each other. There's no maiden, mother, crone sequence or aspects involved here. Three goddesses in one, unified in the symbol of fire. The name Brigid actually means bright arrow or bright one. This goddess may be prehistoric and dates back a very long time to pre-Celtic inhabitants of Scotland and Ireland. She goes back, to at least 5000 BC. Now, for example, the massive sandstones, the Saracens, used in the buildings of prehistoric pre-Celtic monuments are known as bride stones. Brigid is in fact a Neolithic, late Stone Age divinity. Brigid has a major shrine at Kildare, where 19 virgins tended the undying fire, and on the 20th day of each cycle, according to legend, the fire was tended by the goddess herself. Brigid brings to humanity the art of whistling. She invents it one night so she can call her friends in the dark. She also invents keening. For those of you who don't know, keening is, a type of Irish mournful song. Brigid is also identified with the earth itself and with the soil's fertility. Her brass shoes were considered sacred objects, and she is the Celtic feminine force par excellence. For example, no man was ever allowed to pass beyond the hedges surrounding her shrine or sanctuary under penalty of death. Now, the Christian Saint Brigid continues the goddess's pagan traditions. The cult of Saint Brigid had a conscious fertility aspect, and the saint took over many of the goddess's divine functions. For example, both the saint and the goddess, well, their cows yielded a lake of milk. Their food supply was inexhaustible. For example, one measure of the saint's malt would make ale for all her churches. The goddess and the saint share the same feast day, February 1st. This is the pre-Christian feast of Imbolg, with pronounced fertility and pastoral aspects. The saint and the goddess both protect the flocks and are guardians of the family hearth and preside over childbirth. For example, the saint was, according to legend, the midwife to the Virgin Mary and the foster mother of Christ. The goddess is in fact the patroness of midwives and protectoress of childbirth and infants. Saint Brigid was said to have the power to appoint the bishops in her lands, which is a rather strange role for an abbess. The bishops had to be practiced blacksmiths, silversmiths, or goldsmiths, because the goddess Brigid was associated with the divine magical art of smithing. Many curious attributes of the Christian Saint Brigid are identical to the pagan goddess Brigid. In fact, there's a debate among historians and theologians whether Saint Brigid was an actual historical figure, a real person. Little is known about her life. but we know that her cult was very popular and influential. My guess is that she was an actual person. There are two origin stories surrounding the saint. In one, she is the daughter of humble Irish parents at Vinmaras, near Kildare. The second legend, or origin myth, is that she's the daughter of a druid that's baptized by Saint Brigit. The historical Brigit was supposed to be around from around 453 to 525 AD. Now, she takes religious vows and becomes a nun at an early age, founding the monastery at Kildare. In fact, it's probably the first monastery in Ireland. She then becomes a very powerful abbess. She writes a book, The Story of Her Life, which is written in Latin. This is around 500 AD. The book is translated into Middle English, Irish, French, and German. It's a very influential and important text. The book played a major role in the Christianization of Ireland, Germany, and England. Saint Brigid was canonized quickly after her death. The Christian saint bears the name of the goddess of fertility and traditional commencement of spring. As I mentioned, her pagan feast day is Christianized, taken over by the Christians, as well as the veneration of fertility and light. Saint Brigid's cross is a type of solar wheel and symbol of good fortune. The sun, as I mentioned, was venerated by the Celts as a life giver and promoter of healing and fertility. The Saint Brigid's cross, Christian incorporation of pagan Celtic motifs and symbolism to help convert the people to the new faith. All right, with that thought, we're going to take another musical break.